Good morning. It is Monday, September 28th, just after 9 a.m. in the morning. My name is Larry Cedar, and I'm back with you for another session on what I call Sqanning, S-Q-A-N-N-I-N-G. Sqanning is a relaxation technique which utilizes the incremental release of muscular tension to achieve a deep state of physical, emotional, and hopefully mental calm. So we're here today to practice that technique. If you've been here before, I will just say that you're not going to hear anything different in terms of the technique. It's a very simple technique. It's easy to learn, and all I do is come here to practice with you. If that's of any value to you, you certainly don't need me. But if you find it helpful and reinforcing to practice, then that's why I'm here. I do this myself a couple times a day in addition to these sessions because I'm really sort of addicted to the practice. I find it so beneficial. So I try to do one a couple times a week just as reinforcement for anyone who might find the technique valuable and would like some reinforcement and encouragement. Now, I'm a little out of breath. Occasionally, what I'll do is I'll work out first, my exercise, and then do the session. Typically, I like to do my session first because that relaxes my body and the workout goes that much more easily. But sometimes, like today, being out of breath, I'll work out first and do the session afterwards as a way to sort of stabilize, sort of calm my body and bring myself back to a kind of more normalized state because exercise does tend to get you kind of wound up. So excuse me while I catch my breath. So, today I want to talk about something very, very specific regarding this technique, and that's the word habit. Habit. H-A-B-I-T, habit. Our lives are to a large extent governed by habit. And what is habit? In my mind, habit is a ditch. If we are flowing water, if I may be so metaphysical, if we are flowing water, flowing through life, habits are ditches we dig in the ground that facilitate the flow of our water in a certain direction. And depending on how long you've had a habit, that ditch will either be somewhat shallow and easily changed or very deep and difficult to change. Once water has flowed into a ditch, as you know, it's virtually impossible to get it out of that ditch. It will stay in that ditch and flow along the course of that ditch as long as that ditch exists. So habits, because I just worked out, habits are the ditches we've dug in our consciousness that we use to guide us through life. And some of these habits or ditches are very valuable. Some of them are very constructive and some of them are very destructive and harmful. It's just a fact. I have a whole bunch of bad habits which are very, very difficult to change. And so learning how to scan is in a way learning how to reprogram yourself away from certain bad habits and towards good habits. But changing your habits is very difficult. And the reason I practice scanning so much is because I have several ingrained behavioral habits, which I may have the rest of my life, and you may have some of them too, which were established very early in my life. We establish habits very early in life. We grow up and we learn how to deal with certain problems in a certain way. Like I say, either constructively or not constructively. But these become our habits, and this is our personality. And they always say when you get to know someone, when people are first dating, let's say, and they think they know them, and then only as they get to know them over time do they see their really ingrained habits. And they always say you can't change people. Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't, but you understand how when you have certain ingrained ways of doing things, then you just don't want to change. They feel like a security blanket. So scanning is a way of looking at things differently, and I'll explain why. Again, you'll forgive me if you've heard some of this before, if you've been here before, but basically this technique is based on the ideas of a man named Thaddeus Golas, G-O-L-A-S, and he wrote a book called The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment, which you can still get. It's hard to get the original edition, but if you can get it, I think it's the best. He started changing it and kind of tweaking it in a way that I thought wasn't as unique as the original, but that's your choice. And what Thaddeus Golas said is that there's two basic processes in life: contraction, squeeze your hands together, and expansion, release. And he said everything in life, everything you look at, feel, touch, think about, do, can be described or understood through the lens of those two processes. You look at life and you say, is this contracting or is this expanding? And it's a very broad way of defining the world, but in a sense you can really begin to understand it if you look at things. My body is a contraction. It's a bringing together of cells, atoms, material, muscles, fibers in order to form a human body. And this began when I was conceived, and this construction has taken different shapes and forms, but when I die, I will dissipate or expand and turn back into dust. That's the natural course of life. So in life, Everything in life alternates between a contracted state or an expanded state, and that includes our state of mind. We can either be in a contracted state of mind, or we can be in an expanded state of mind. And the easiest way to describe that is a fist or an open hand. When we are contracted, we are limited. Nothing can penetrate, nothing can get in. We're fixed, rigid. We can't adapt or change because we are solid, we are imploded. That is the ultimate contracted state of mind. When we begin to expand and open up, as you can see, you become permeable. Things can join you, merge with you. You can do things with this hand now. It's flexible and available. So it's good to be contracted because it is the stuff of life. It's how we get things done. It's how we do things. It's how we assemble things, build things. It's how we argue, talk, tweet, post. But you have to be careful about coming overly contracted because then you're rigid, impermeable, and your life begins to suffer because of it. You become limited. You become closed off. We tend in life to move towards contraction as the solution to all our problems. That just seems to be our go-to mode of operation. That's fine. You get up in the morning and you say, what do I need to do today? We build a checklist, a contraction. We begin to execute those tasks. Excellent. However, you all know that if we overthink things, if we work too hard, if we become too rigid in our thinking, too limited in our scope, our lives begin to suffer and we begin to feel, simply put, bad. If you want to feel good, and I want to feel good, I'd rather feel good, then it's helpful to learn how to release and expand. Sqanning is the process of incrementally releasing the muscles in your body to put it into a state of expansion, which in turn affects your emotions and your mind and your very state of being. And to go back what I said at the very beginning, I said we were going to talk about habits today. Habits frequently include contracting. I habitually contract in my life. When I have a problem, I lock into an idea. I lock into a decision as to how I'm going to handle it, and I become very inflexible. And frequently, I will perform the same approach as I've done 100 times before, even though I've learned it doesn't work. I have a lot of bad habits. Expansion, sqanning, the incremental release of muscular tension allows you to open your mind to possibilities, allows you to stop behaving in one particular way, and begin to realize there are other options. It opens you up. It makes you permeable, accepting, available, more relaxed, and more efficient and happy in your life. So that's why we do it. So that's enough of an introduction. Excuse me, as I said, I just worked out, so I'm a little, shall we say, sweaty. But we're going to start now with this practice and just see if you can instinctively begin to understand how this can help you in your life, if it can. If it can't, that's fine. But it's helped me, and so I'm sharing it with you. We start with the muscles because muscles can either do one of two things: contract, squeeze your hands together, or release. That's all muscles can do. They're not designed to do anything else. They don't think creatively. They don't adapt in any particular way. They contract or expand, depending on the instructions we send them or the way they instinctively react in any given situation. So using the muscles is the perfect metaphor for this contraction-expansion idea. If we can learn to contract and expand our muscles on demand, and particularly induce an expansive state into our body by relaxing all the muscles in our body, that will influence, you will see, your emotional state and your mental state. Because if you think of the mind as a muscle of sorts, holding onto ideas and thoughts tightly, even though it isn't necessarily good for you, as you relax your body and you begin to induce this relaxed, expanded state into your body, your mind begins to release and it lets go of all those obsessive thoughts and anxious ideas that you've been holding onto. They float away, and what are you left with? Yourself. Open, available, free, happy. That is my goal. That is why I practice. And if you find it of value and helpful to you, I will be very happy. If you don't, that's fine. We're all so unique. We all have such unique sensibilities that you have to move towards what works for you. This is a suggestion that might work for you, and I hope it does. So I'm trying to break my contractive habits. I tend to overthink things. I tend to worry. I tend to become fearful and rigid. I tend to become afraid and closed off. And I'm being perfectly honest with you, as embarrassing as that might be, but I'm a human being. And I get caught up in all the normal anxieties and neuroses that human beings do. And what I've found is when I can incrementally release the muscles of my body, it puts me into a more expanded state, and I come to a place of calm, still joy. And it feels wonderful. And if I can get there 2-3 times a day, it balances my life. If we move on a spectrum all day between contraction and expansion and we become overly contracted, scanning or expansion or muscular release will bring you back in an expansive direction until you are centered, because life ultimately is a combination of both contraction and expansion. You just want to bring yourself back to center. So, all that said, and I've said a lot, let's begin. We begin this process in a very simple way. Again, the hands, the muscles are a metaphor for our very state of consciousness. We are either contracted, expanded, or somewhere between the two. So if you squeeze your hands together right now with me and squeeze very tightly, very tight, that is contraction, and that's good. It's good to be able to use the muscles of your hands, your body. It's good to golf. It's good to play baseball. It's good to swim. It's good to make love. It's good to run. It's good to use your mind and body to advance your goals and agendas. Muscular strength is good. The problem we run into, and if we hold this for a while and just keep your hands really tightly held, is we become overly contracted. We become stuck in a certain position. We become rigid. We become unavailable, immovable, closed off. That's over contraction, and that's where we tend to drift. We get up in the morning and we start our day and keep squeezing tight. We start our day, we answer 15 emails, we post 20 posts and 20 tweets, we make 20 phone calls, we get in our car and drive in traffic, we go to work, we deal with whatever issues we're having to deal with, or we deal with the lack of work, which is a psychological challenge. And we just keep contracting all day because it's our go-to solution. It is a habit. It's hard to let go of. When we're in trouble and keep squeezing your hands, we think, well, I don't feel good. What are my choices? Well, I'll just contract some more. So we squeeze more tightly, and that gets us even more contracted. So the problem is, how do we let go of contraction? How do we expand? How do we release? It's a very simple solution. Just do it. You are in total control of your state of consciousness at all times. You may have no control over the world around you. None. Things can change on a daily basis, on a minute-to-minute basis, but you can always control your state of consciousness. And how do you do that? Simply release. 3, 2, 1, release. Let go. Take a deep breath. So you did it. And we start that way because it's important to remind ourselves, not only that we are in a contracted state, oh, this is me, but that we have a choice to let go of that contracted state. 3, 2, 1, release. Drop your hands and see how different that feels than being contracted. You're free. All you had to do was let go of this choice. Let it go. Come to a neutral place. And we're going to take 3 expansive breaths, and breaths by nature are expansive. So I always say, if you've got time for nothing else, because this process we're going to do for about a half an hour, but if you've got 5 minutes, do nothing but take deep, deep breaths. Breaths are expansive by nature. You're filling your lungs. If nothing else, you will move the dial that much closer to expansion. It's just a physical approach to changing your state of mind. So take 3 deep breaths with me now. Ready? Here we go. As deep as you can. And one more. So we've squeezed and released the hands. We've taken deep breaths. The next step, and what I call these preliminary processes, is to sit perfectly still in silence. Stillness and silence. Why do we sit perfectly still? Because we rarely do that. And I mean still, frozen. Don't move a muscle. Continue to breathe. When you do that, you send a signal to your body that we are stopping what we were doing. We're stopping all of our contractions, and we're about to change course. Stillness and silence, because that stops the thought process. So take 3 more deep breaths, followed by 15 seconds of stillness and silence. 3 deep, deep breaths. Absolute stillness and silence. 15 seconds. Continue to breathe. Deep breath. So I like to look at it like we're sort of like a wild horse, excuse me again, running around the corral, habitually out of control with all our contractions and activities and all the things we think are going to make us feel better. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on the phone, we're emailing, we're looking at the internet. We're just running around like a wild horse in a corral. These 3 preliminary steps, squeezing your hands together and releasing, take 3 deep breaths sitting in absolute stillness and silence for 15 seconds, are sort of like getting a rope, getting it around the horse's neck, pulling it into the center of the ring and saying, okay, time to train. Time to stop what you're doing, change direction, calm yourself, bring yourself back to center so that we can begin. The simple act of sitting in absolute stillness and silence, and I mean frozen, don't move a muscle. It's a very powerful signal to your body that we're changing. We're about to change. So we're going to go through these 3 preliminary steps again, and then we're going to go into what I call the nuts and bolts of the technique, which is the actual incremental release of muscular tension. To get back to the concept I said initially, we're trying to break a habit. If the habit is contraction, we're trying to break that habit and begin to reinforce that expanding is a frequently better option. So we practice it to become familiar with how it feels so that we can go to it as we need. So here we go. Squeeze your hands together. Very tight, 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 tight. That's contraction. And look at yourself. This is you. You've stepped outside your body, your consciousness, and this is you. This represents you. So you're tight. That's okay. You're using your muscles, but you've become, let's say, overly contracted. So on your count, on my count, you're going to make a choice. It's all within your control to expand. 3, 2, 1, release. Drop your hands to your sides. Take 3 deep, deep breaths. Make that 5 deep breaths. 2 more. 1 more. 30 seconds of absolute stillness and silence. Continue to breathe. Freeze. Deep breath. And take a moment to register any changes you might be experiencing. And I'll share with you what I'm feeling. And I always do because, again, I do these sessions for myself, not just for you, but because I benefit from them. So I do the same thing I always do, and I register the change. Well, the change I always feel, and again, if you've been here before, you've heard me say this, it's very interesting, is a sense of detachment. For a moment, I forgot that I was doing a session. For a moment, I was just sitting here. And that's typical for expansion. As you expand, you detach yourself from your external processes, all the external processes that you've hooked yourself into, that you feel define you, that define who you are, your money, your job, your career, whatever activity you're involved in. When you expand, all of that becomes meaningless. You detach from the things you feel define you, that advance you, and you come to a place where you just exist. And it's a relief. You don't have to work at that. You can just be. Just from those simple preliminary steps. So as I said, any one of those, if you have no time at all to do the full scanning process, any one of those, squeeze, release your hands, just to remind yourself that you have the power to expand. Take a series of deep breaths, which are expansive by nature, or sit in absolute stillness and silence. Silence because words, thoughts are contractions. So when you silence yourself, you expand. Just do any one of those for 5 minutes and see what it does for you. And I always say that as these sessions continue, I begin to take longer pauses, and you'll forgive me, but silence is golden. And I begin to instinctively recognize that in doing nothing, in just being, there is great peace, there is great comfort, there is great joy, there is great calm and satisfaction in just being. And I understand instinctively that that's the goal of this process. The goal of this process is to let go of all your concerns and worries and attachments and processes into which you've involved yourself and come back to just being. And that's the change I feel just from the preliminary steps, which I call scanning. You can call it whatever you like. It's just a name. You know, people ask me, how did you come up with the name scanning? Well, you're scanning your body ultimately, and you'll see as we do the muscular release, you're looking for pockets of tension, muscular tension, and you're releasing those pockets of tension. I spelled it with a Q just to be different, memorable, but that's all you're doing, is we're finding pockets of muscular tension. So we've done the preliminary steps. So let's quickly, because I've only got, let's see, what have I said? Another 10 minutes. Let's move through this process of muscular release. So if the muscles can only contract and expand, muscles only can do one of two things. And we've been contracted, well, we're going to now expand and release the muscles of the body, including muscles which may have been in a contracted state that you weren't even aware of. You have tension in your body that you carry with you at all times, just as a way of being in the world. We feel instinctively that we can't be in the world without having a certain amount of control. And all that tension can be released. You don't need to have that tension in your body. What do we do to release tension in our lives? Because we instinctively recognize that it's not healthy. Well, we drink, or we smoke joints, or we go to masseuses, or there's all sorts of things because we instinctively recognize that being overly contracted doesn't feel good. We want to feel good. So this is a way to release those tensions without chemicals or anything of that nature, but just naturally. So we're going to start with what I call the first muscle group, and that's the face. And we start with the face because, like the fist, make a fist and release, we use our face a lot. So we're familiar with how it feels to clench and release. That's all we're doing. We're going to release. So on my count, you're going to let the tension in the muscles of your face release. 1%, a tiny amount. It's called the incremental release of muscular tension. But what you're looking for, it's not the quantity of the release, it's a recognition of the sensation of release. I want you to get better and better at what it feels like to release a muscle group. The face. 3, 2, 1, here we go. Release. And you'll notice my face drooped. I flipped a switch, I turned off the power to those muscles, and they just released. If you've ever been, and I hope you frequently are, in a deep state of relaxation or sleep, your muscles just do nothing. They're completely inactive because the body has recognized that you're in a place where you can just let go. You don't need to be holding that tension. And it does a number of things for you. First of all, it feels great. Secondly, it takes the energy load off your system. It takes energy to contract a muscle. Even if you're just sitting here and you don't think you're contracted, if you let go of the muscle group in a part, the tension in a muscle group in your body has to work that less hard to hold that tension. So you're releasing energy, which is also sort of a rush. The face. 3, 2, 1, release. Now I'm going to move through the other groups fairly quickly just to show you what they are, and then we'll wrap it up because I keep these sessions to a half an hour. But use this as a guide to take some time for yourself to study this process of expansion. Zone 1 was the face. Zone 2 is the top of the head. 3, 2, 1, release. Again, it's a dropping release sensation. Each of you will have a different experience of what it feels like to release muscular tension, but watch for that sensation. If I could make a sound which describe this feeling, it's it's a relief. You don't need to hold all that muscular tension. And that muscular tension comes on usually as a result of thinking. We put ourselves into an action mode. We're worried, so we're tense. What do I need to do to fix my situation? And as I spoke of earlier, habit. Create a new habit which says to solve this problem, perhaps the solution is not to tense, to contract, but to release, to let go. Zone 3, the back of the head. 3, 2, 1, release. And now my shoulders just dropped. Your body will frequently do that. You'll be addressing one particular muscle group and another muscle group will respond in kind, almost in sympathy with that muscle group, and you'll find this begins to happen. So let that happen. Zone 4, the neck. 3, 2, 1, release. There went the shoulders again. Zone 5, the shoulders. 3, 2, 1, let them drop, release. Zone 6, the chest, the stomach, and waist. 3, 2, 1, release. Zone 7, down the back and into the pelvis, and that includes a lot of sensitive areas. So if it feels strange, that's okay. You're not going anywhere. No one's coming in the room. No one's leaving. It's just you. So figure out a way to relax muscles which are typically tense, particularly those in the pelvis. 3, 2, 1, release. And finally, Zone 8, down the legs, across the knees, and into the feet. Think about your feet. Think about how much tension you hold in your feet. And 3, 2, 1, release. Take a deep breath. And I take this time because ultimately, being in the moment, being in silence, not doing, but being, expanding, being aware, being still, being quiet, being calm, is the goal of all of this. I'm a good talker. I can talk nonstop. That's my habit. That's my comfort. That's my contraction. And sometimes the only way I can get myself to shut up is to expand, via Sqanning or some other way. But that place of stillness and silence and calm, where everything's just okay, everything's just fine, that's the goal. So if you come to that place and you can find a way to comfortably sit in stillness and silence, by all means, take that time. That's what I'm doing now. We are surrounded by institutions and forces and people who are more than happy to tell us what actions and contraction we should participate in to make ourselves happy. There are very few people out there in the world telling you that silence and stillness is also an option and a solution. And I'm here to tell you that, or to remind you, because I think we all instinctively know that. That's what I'm doing. When I practice this technique, I'm reminding myself, because as much as I practice this technique, I forget. I forget, or out of habit, to come back to where I started the session, I just go back to action, contraction. Just out of habit. So I scan to train myself to break that habit. To remember, to remind myself that of equal, if not greater value, is coming to a place of stillness and silence. Disengaged from all the anxieties, neuroses, worries, fears, activities, arguments, posting, tweeting that I've imagined were the solution. And it's a great thing to do. It frees you. It frees you, and it reminds you that all of this, if I may be so existential, is just a game that we participate in and play, sometimes joyfully, sometimes not so joyfully. But we can step out at any given moment, and just for a moment, and remember that it's just us. And that's it for today. So take any or all of these techniques and practice them on your own. Practice does help. The reason I do it so much is because I find the more I practice, the more familiar I am with the destination, the more easily and readily I can get there. So that's why I practice, and I recommend you do. But if you can do it once a week, you'll benefit. Just remind yourself that expansion is an option. It's not the intuitive choice on many occasions, but if you're willing to experiment and take the risk to go to a place of nothingness, you may very well rediscover yourself, rediscover that life can be very simple and very joyful in the moment. It's called Sqanning, Sqanning, the incremental release of muscular tension to achieve a deep state of physical, emotional, and mental calm. I'm getting a comment here, Arden. Thank you. Arden says, thank you. Thank you, Arden. Thanks for coming and participating. I saw some other comments earlier. I think someone was a fan of Square One TV, which I was on in the 80s. So thank you. Thanks for coming. Everyone, thanks for coming and watching. I try to get here every couple days at least. But I'm going to repost this session now on my Facebook page. And I also will post it on the Sqanning Facebook page, Sqanning. You can go there and like and follow that page if you want to be alerted when there's new sessions. And there's also a YouTube page. I always end every session with rule number 1. For me, in my mind, rule number 1 is love yourself. Love is the most expansive action you can take in the universe. It's always good to love. Start with yourself. This is where it all begins. This is what you were given. You have to love yourself before you can proceed. Because why not? So love yourself, and when you've got so much in you that it's spilling over, give it to the rest of us, because we could all use it as well. In the meantime, have yourself a great week. Much love. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.